And Benjamin Cesco. Benjamin Cesco, like, if for me, he is the perfect type of striker in my eyes. Like, when you look at him on paper, although we'll get into certain things I don't believe he's very good at right now, but on paper, you look at Benjamin Cesco and you think, right, this guy, tailor-made striker, centre forward, and he's a certified bang for me, unless injuries prevail and dictate proceedings. That's something that you can never really control as a someone watching football and analysing a player. But I just look at the raw attributes and what he is right now as well, in which I think there are raw aspects, and like we said, we'll get into them. But I think he's a lot more ready than what people give him credit for as well. And like, if you are someone who loves a player, a centre forward who is an absolute pace demon, Cesco is that. He's rapid, like ridiculous pace, ferocious in the channels, repeated sprints, constantly challenging the last line. Movement in the box, very, very intelligent. I really want to stress that. You're going to love Benjamin Cesco. Like, you absolutely love him. And when you look at what Arsenal need across the front line in terms of speed and the ability to be a lot more potent in transition, Cesco is certainly going to help us massively there. Those are the positives. We'll probably get into the other things, but yeah, I'm really happy.
Certainly will.
I think
certainly will.
As an overall package, just to quickly end on, when I look at the prices that are quoted for strikers in the market, I think if we're looking at 60 million, 65 million for Benjamin Cesco, I think that's good value, very good value for the player that he is, and the player that he can become as well.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and I would say I'm overall in favour, but it would depend on a lot of things. Because Šeško, in conjunction with other things, was part of my ideal summer. So I want to say that. So I'm really, really happy in terms of the as you say, all the positives that come out of him. I was trying to find, where was it in the thing? Let me see if I can find it. I made a list yesterday for a video of all the things I think we're missing from our forward line. Like, I just wrote it out.
Yeah.
But let's make it now, because I can't find it.
Yeah.
I think we're missing channel running.
Yep.
He brings that. We're missing pace.
Yep.
He brings that. We're missing height. He brings that. We're missing athleticism. He brings that. We're missing ability to quickly break, and then decision making and how he deals with that and stuff we can come to. But in terms of the capacity to do so, we're missing that. I think we're missing ball striking. I know we joke about it, but genuinely off both feet, we're missing that.
I'd say we're missing in terms of like quick snapshots, ability to create separation from the get-go, from a standstart. And
absolutely. And by the way, maybe Saka has some of this, maybe Martin has some of this, but I'm saying as a group, just to build the list of things that Arsenal are missing from the forward group, this is one of those things. I'm missing other things. Poaching sort of instinct, I would say. I think we're missing, and maybe there's some quibble on there for Šeško. I would say we're missing the sort of grandma, I would do anything, I would kill my own grandma for a goal type gene, which I think I do believe Šeško maybe doesn't show in the same way as others, but I think he has from what I've seen. So if you're breaking down a list of, if you're creating the why for why this has happened, Šeško makes a lot of sense, because he feels he is, you have a puzzle piece that Arsenal are lacking, and in terms of the shape, that's right.
Yeah.
The color of the puzzle piece, the development of the puzzle piece, the immediate impact of the puzzle piece is a different conversation. But for example, if someone's like Gyökeres ticks all these boxes as well, mate, he doesn't. He doesn't, in terms of height, in terms of the pace, in terms of the athleticism. There's a lot of things that, and Gyökeres, I would say, maybe has more of a poacher's instinct than Šeško. He doesn't. I'm sorry. So in terms of the puzzle piece that Šeško is for Arsenal, great. But would I be lying to say I don't like it? It all depends. Basically, how this plays out. If we go and sign Rodrigo and Watkins as a dream alongside Cesco, I am over the moon. But if he is the only centre forward signing, he's the only forward signing.
Yeah, I think but a lot of this window depends on how we kind of complement the centre forward and the left wing signing in general, isn't it? And I think with Cesco, it's kind of like the biggest reason as to why I'm really, really keen on the deal is because his weaknesses right now are some of the biggest strengths Mikel is able to implement in the players and how he coaches them.
Yep.
That is, for me, the biggest thing. So when we look at Cesco's weaknesses, I'll go for them right now. Now, George mentions it a lot, and he's absolutely bang on about it in terms of, he's 6'5", but he doesn't realize it. Genuinely, it is so spot on. Now, I've recently watched games against Borussia Dortmund, and he's up against Emre Can. Emre Can is physically bullying him in aerial duels in terms of these balls going over the top, and Cesco's not able to pin him. And you're thinking to yourself, how is that even like that? That's crazy when you consider the mismatch there. But it's down on his the way that he uses his body and the way he pins centre backs in those scenarios. Now, what is Mikel Arteta really good at with forward players? It is the back to goal play. It is their ability to resist contact. Regardless of what anyone says about Kai Havertz, from the player that Kai Havertz was to when he came to Arsenal, there were massive worries about his physical capacity to pin centre backs and to roll contact in those scenarios. He's improved significantly in that regard. Martinelli, he's improved significantly in that regard. Bukayo Saka, Eddie Nketiah. These are players that we have a track record there of the manager being able to extract more out of players who are not the most physically imposing, but they hold their own in these battles. Now, you've got someone like Benjamin Cesco, who is 6'5", and all the tools there. That is someone that is why I think Mikel Arteta is so keen on this, because he can work with him and he can mold him into a player that becomes so complete. And I think the way we use Cesco right now, and again, we'll probably get into more of it, but it's Cesco in terms of when you're going long and it's looking to compete for aerial duels. Cesco right now, the best way to use him is not to lump it long directly to him. It is to lump it long in space.
Get him to run.
That is a massive difference in terms of the way that we use Kai Havertz, for example. Kai Havertz, we look at David Raya. It's the transferable quality from Brentford to Arsenal. Brentford, David Raya to Ivan Toney, flick-ons. And again here, David Raya to Kai Havertz. If we're using Benjamin Cesco in that way right now, it doesn't make sense because he's not able to resist contact in that way with the balls going over the top when talking aerially. But if you hit balls into the channels, Benjamin Cesco is a nightmare for defenders because of that ferocity and the repeated sprints. Statistically in the Bundesliga, Alex, I think he's made the 7th most sprints out of anyone. That tells you the
I was looking at those numbers yesterday. I knew you were looking after it. Yeah, the stamina is crazy. And again, we should do a hot. You've mentioned the weakness there, so in terms of the dealing with contact from behind, that is a big weakness of his as well. And we should maybe talk more about the weaknesses as well. But you keep sort of coming to it, for example, with the use of his body. But look at Havertz. That this is kind of the point: is that we have players who can do a lot of the things that he's weak at, but we don't have players who do a lot of things that he's good at. The puzzle piece thing, the argument is there. Also, just separately, I'm going to try and find some data to bring in and to contextualize this conversation. But this is from Data MB. This is one of the things, something that we looked at him last year, and then I've looked at him again this year, and honestly, I do see an improvement, and I want to try and put that out in the numbers. This is from Data MB. You can see the XG and the non-penalty goals have gone down, but I think Leipzig have had a worse season this season. But in terms of the other stuff, is in terms of attacking actions, his expected assists and passes into the box, in terms of his aerial, he's either stayed the same or he's got a touch better. The XG and the non-penalty goal stuff is a concern, and we'll come to that as well. But I do think some of that comes down to Leipzig. And also, I think in the conversation with Gyökeres and Cesco, just in that, again, the puzzle piece thing fits for me in terms of what Gyökeres does and what Šeško does. But this is the data again from Data MB. Again, this is only certain things looking at centre forwards, so you can look at that. But Šeško is better in the air, better in terms of passes into the box. There's not much between them in terms of passes received. There's not much between them in terms of in the air. Not actually that far off in terms of non-penalty goals. Gyökeres is much higher on the XG. And then consider the league difference. This one's 21, one's 26. And for me, I think the idea that Gyökeres is miles past him in even in the things that he's strong at, I don't necessarily agree. So I think there are some numbers that are quite exciting, but then also I'm just going to bring up something else. There are some numbers that are a bit of a concern. So let's try and put some more context to that. This is Šeško when compared. Thank you for super chats as well. We'll come to them as well. This is Šeško when compared to Hugo Ekitike. So this is in the Bundesliga. So this is for Bundesliga. 90s played 18.1 for Hugo Ekitike and 90s played 17.3. Yeah, and I will say, like, you can go through and go, okay, well, in the more important stuff, like, for example, Ekitike is a mile ahead of him in terms of deep touches. Well, that's more about play style. Like, you could go through and make a case for this and be like, it's actually not that bad. But ultimately, there are things where, you look at that radar and that doesn't tell a particularly pretty story. There is context. We should come to it in terms of the Leipzig season, Frankfurt season, the things like, for example, aerials, they're pretty close. Turnovers, they're pretty close. Dribbles completed is not that far. Deep touches is play style. But equally, Ekitike is ahead of him. If you were just looking at pure stats, you look at Ekitike. Any more on sort of his issues?
I in terms of his issues, and I want to expand a little bit more on this, and I really want to focus on the way that Leipzig have used him in a Pender this season from what I've watched. And it's kind of like what they've had is Benjamin Cesco, and it fluctuates a lot, but I've seen Benjamin Cesco receiving a lot in deeper areas, ball to feet, and then quick passes, then spinning in behind. And it's a Pender making a lot of these runs as well. And when you look at the density of the number of touches in box situations, I don't know what the heat maps are, but from what I've watched, I can guarantee, I believe I can guarantee that a Pender has had more involvement in the box, and that's the usage of the two players. And that's why I think it makes sense as well, the passes into the box as well, with Cesco ranking really high there, and the volume of passes there. But I think with Cesco, the other issues in which it's actually one of his biggest strengths in terms of the ability to kind of receive the ball and then just smack it top bins. But I feel with Benjamin Cesco is like when he has a lot of time on the ball and there's open spaces, his decision making can leave a lot to be desired, and it can be really frustrating when sometimes there is the pass to play as opposed to taking the shot off. Where I think Cesco's fantastic is when he's playing with instinct and when the spaces are a lot tighter and you don't have much time to think and you've got to release it quickly or take a shot quickly in a situation, as opposed to being someone who's carrying where he's so powerful in the carry. But I think sometimes the decision making in the final third can really frustrate you. And that's where, we've been frustrated by that in transition this season, where the opportunity is to play the right pass, is to make the right decision in the final third. Cesco in those scenarios can also annoy you. Whereas I think Cesco is best when he's the one making the run and he's the one looking to finish the move. Now, again, even in that scenario, he misses opportunities and he misses gilt edge opportunities as well. But I think that's a better way to use him as opposed to being the person who's predominantly carrying and is forced to make the decision before the final pass. So, I think for me, though, it's kind of like when we look at the way that we've seen with Mikel Merino as number 9, and if we go really back and look at baseline analysis and the impact that he's had, there's no reason why Benjamin Cesco would not be able to have a profound impact either, with the upside that he brings as well and the guaranteed potential of being a certified bank. And I believe the way that we should use Cesco is different to the way that Leipzig use him. And that, for me, is one of the big reasons as to why he has underachieved in terms of his output. Pure baseline output of 13 goals. Like, you see 13 goals, you compare it to Gyökeres. And that's where I think people are like, just look at the pure output that Gyökeres is getting. But that's where I think, okay, but let's have a look at the system and the environment that he is in. And it's not giving him the tools to also have that high volume output. Whereas I think at Arsenal, it would help him a lot more in terms of not being the person who is constantly deep and and making that first pass, that link. And he's really good at that. But I'd argue he's much better at being in box situations, making these smart runs on the back post or peeling on the front post and receiving cutbacks. That's a better way of using him. And I think he would churn out more output. And I think he'll give a bigger impact than what people say. But then it's kind of like that balance, isn't it? Of like, he'll do better than what a lot of people think. But at the same time, be wary of you have this idea of him on paper, an idealistic view of Benjamin Cesco, but it's also not the reality right now.
Yeah, and I think there's no guarantees in football, but from those you speak to who are within it are pretty guaranteed that this guy is going to get somewhere really, really special, and that's great. But yeah, there are some concerns. I think you're talking about the usage, and it's really important as well to just say that as well. Just to give the context, so Leipzig finished 7th. They finished outside of Europe for the first time, which I think will help us in negotiations in a long time. They finished below Mainz and Freiburg and Dortmund. They also finished below Frankfurt, who Ekitike we were talking about earlier. I've watched less of them than you have, but I think I think they only scored 53 goals overall. So this idea that Cesco was going to go and score 20, 25 for them. And, look, I hear the concerns about the goals. I want to be absolutely clear that this guy's not going to come in and score 30 goals for us. But actually, and I said this yesterday, so this isn't just copium based on the news. I said this in the TDK video that came out. My thing with the goal tally this season, so it went down for the first time in 3 years. So it went up for 2 years, got the record in 23, 24, and it went down this season. Okay. My response to that, some people, is go and get a 30-goal a season striker. That's not my personal response. My response is, how do you get more goals out of Saka? My response is, how do you get more goals out of Martinelli and Jesus and Trossard and Šeško and Havertz and whoever? Keep them on the pitch, first and foremost, is a big one. But you, for me, my response is never, if you can go and do that, maybe great. But only the very, 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 very best strikers do that. And we would have probably moved for Isak if we could have done, and he maybe would have done that. But for me, a more sustainable solution and a pretty good solution is to look around your team. And as I say, I think your usage point is really, really good. I also think there's specific games, running games, where Šeško is going to thrive. Maybe low block games, we're still looking at Havertz next season for certain periods of games. Šeško can also come on and be an aerial threat. She can be a target to run into channels when games open up a little bit more. I think when I'm looking at games, maybe like Brentford, maybe like Newcastle, where I want more running, I think Šeško could be great for us. And maybe there's going to be games where Havertz plays as well, and that's fine because it gives him space to grow. But that's only a problem if Šeško is the only signing.
Yeah, exactly.
If Šeško is your only signing and that's all you can do, then yeah, you are concerned because he's not. I don't actually think he's going to play every minute, for example, and people won't want that.
Yeah.
Let's come on to more of the deal side of things. I do think it's really, really important because there was a part of me going, okay, is there a world where Arsenal don't sign a 9 this summer? And there was a world, because I was looking around going, okay, I'm looking at the 9 market and there isn't a perfect answer. There isn't, I don't go, I'm looking at Gyökeres and say there's qualities I like. I have some big concerns. Šeško, clearly that's going somewhere. Some concerns. Ekitike, it feels like a small sample. You're going through each one and there's no perfect answer other than Isak, and that's not happening. So there was a world that I was going, will Arsenal sign a 9? And frankly, even just optically for the fans, I'm really glad they have. And I think it's really important.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why I'm really big on Cesco as well, because I'm looking at the 9 market and the options are quite scarce as well. When we're talking about, like, there's a lot of uncertainty with every single player that is presented in the market outside of like an Alexander Isak. But an Alexander Isak won the
even him injuries. You could say injuries.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, you've got injuries with him as well. It's kind of like Ollie Watkins. Okay, is he falling off a cliff, which is the big narrative now? Is it? Have we got past the stage of going for players who are has-beens, even though I don't agree to that? Gyökeres with the Portuguese league, not watched him, so I can't comment specifically. Benjamin Cesco, 13 goals last season. We need someone who's going to hit the ground running instantly. He's too young. Strikers peak later in their years, around 27, 28. So there's a lot of different caveats with these, and that's why I think for me, go with the option that you have absolute trust in, can give you an impact now, but also the upside is there. The upside is big. And Benjamin Cesco is that. And the thing with Benjamin Cesco as well is, like, as a profile, as a player, like we've mentioned, the attributes that he has, he helps Ødegaard, he helps Saka, he helps Martinelli, he helps all these players around him, because of the type of player he is. In terms of the channels, allowing Martinelli to come more central, making those out-to-in runs. In terms of Ødegaard needs a runner, someone who's going to make incessant runs across the last line. That is Benjamin Cesco. Yep. In terms of as a target for Saka, those half-space crosses when he comes inside, Benjamin Cesco. So there's a lot of qualities here, whereas as a player, that it makes a lot of sense, But as you mentioned...
And it's Šeško first season as well. Like, the impact he's going to have this season is going to be a lot of running.
Yeah, and the other thing as well is, like there's a level of homogeneity in the Premier League in terms of teams squeezing a lot higher, going all the way from the bottom of the table to the top. From the get-go. They don't want to sit in a low block immediately. They want to squeeze. And a lot of these teams that Arsenal struggled against, in terms of the physical mid-blocks, they're willing to go a lot higher because they don't believe Arsenal have the pace in behind to really threaten them. Someone like Benjamin Cesco, I'm pretty sure he is going to cause teams to drop their lines a little bit deeper because centre-backs don't want to keep running back to goal to face that threat and the spaces that you're leaving there behind. So he gives a lot into this team, but obviously there are the caveats and there are the things that will frustrate them. It's kind of like, I think it depends on what you as a fan are right now. If you are someone who is a little bit more patient and is willing to understand that this isn't the finished article, then I think you're going to really love Benjamin Cesco. But if you're expecting someone who's going to hit, like you say, 20 plus Premier League goals, I don't believe that is him right now.
No.
So it depends.
Yeah, and again, that's okay if we carry on. It's all people going, oh, the project's over. This is just potential again. Hang on.
Yeah, exactly.
Hang on. Wait for it's not even June yet. If this is the only signing we do, I will have massive concerns. You will see me on this podcast saying big concerns, guys, that we haven't done enough. But Šeško in combination it's potentially a really, really good signing. Big Cheese, what do you think the highest fee Arsenal should go to get this done?
I felt that 65 million should be the cap. Personally, I think 90 million is just a classic example of looking to drive up the price. But I think 65 million, when I consider the market, and you consider some of the strikers that have been sold of these, like Rasmus Højlund, players like that. Look at the fees that they've acquired. And people say, okay, that's not a good way of looking at the market, but that is how other clubs view us.
That's what the market is.
Yeah, exactly. It's supply and demand, and I think this is the problem. Like certain players, and when you look at from a club's perspective, how they're looking at these other deals and some of the players that they are letting go and the fees that they're acquiring, they'll be looking at Benjamin Cesco and say, why can't we demand a fee of that level? So I think 65 million is solid value, personally.
Yeah, I think it's. I think I'm just trying to find the sort of the recent record for forwards, and you're looking at so you could take the Grealishes and the Felixes, but just more recently. So Harry Kane's gone to Bayern in 2023 for 95 million. Randall Kolo Muani was 95 million to Paris Saint-Germain. More recently, Darwin Núñez was 85 million. These are the more expensive ones. Osimhen to Napoli in 2021 was 78 million. Kai Havertz to Chelsea actually was 80 million.
Gonçalo Ramos to PSG was like 70, 80 million. I think.
Julian Alvarez 24-25 was 75 million euros. So yeah, I think we're shopping in terms of the potential of the player. We're shopping in there. It's difficult because we're signing, and again, people go, "Why are we signing potential?" I'm not going to keep caveating. We're signing potential, and as long as we can do it in conjunction, that's fine. But we are signing a very, very high potential player, and the fee is going to reflect that. But equally, does it not even look bad, but is it a good use of funds this summer to spend 70, 80 million pounds on someone who probably is going to have a 60 or 50 million pound impact? Don't know, hard to say, but ultimately you're
depends
paying
on the other deals, Alex.
It depends on the other deals, and it depends on how he develops at the club. I think this is another thing as well, isn't it? It's like, like when we signed Ben White, 50 million, he was not worth 50 million pounds. That he wasn't worth that, but he has become worth that. So it's exactly. with these types of deals, it's hard to say.
And to be honest, you still have to look at the future.
This is another point I was going to. And sorry to cut you off, but this is another point I was going to make. We're so focused on next season, and that's fair enough. But Arsenal will continue beyond 25, 26. Exactly, it will happen. So
yeah. Do you know what? Someone mentioned this to me like the other day, and I actually bang on with him. And he's kind of like, right, Arsenal need options, right? And Arsenal need players who are going to give different qualities to the current front line. That is what Arsenal need. And he's not in this idea of, and I don't agree with everything. He's not in this idea of, we need a world class level raiser across the front line. That's his perspective, which I don't agree with. But he goes along and says, like, we need variation in terms of the qualities that we have, because this team systematically, tactically is set up very well. It is set up very well. And we mentioned it many times. So now we just need variable quality across the front line that is going to allow us to combat different game states, combat different types of teams, like we said, the physical mid blocks, etc. Because the sample size is there of someone like Mikel Merino. I'll go back to it. Someone like Mikel Merino, who has never played as a number 9 before, has given us quality and has actually held his own. Even though you can see the glaring weaknesses of him in that role. So someone like Benjamin Cesco, where it's kind of like, for me, it's not like completely project type, because I believe he will give us significant output next season. It's not going to be the output that you would want in terms of killer number, but he's going to give significant output right now. But also the upside is there of him being a certified world beater. And it goes back to the Alexander Isak story of when Newcastle signed him back in 2022, which was still a decent fee, big fee for a player. And again, you're going back to the idea of the goals that he scored at that time, not big, a lot of areas to work on. And look at the player that he is right now. He was able to impact proceedings at Newcastle then, but the level in which he's raised over the years has gone up and up and up. And I think you can see a similar scenario with Benjamin Cesco. And that's why I'm very keen on it. And I do believe that you still do have to look at the future as well. You can't just sign players like, okay, they're going to... I think there's a balance, isn't there? Like, that's why I was very keen on Ollie Watkins, because Ollie Watkins, it's kind of like people will come back and say, he's got no resale value. But that's not the point of an Ollie Watkins signing. Ollie Watkins signing is how you are able to achieve significant financial perks by bringing a player who can win now, who is ready now to deliver a Premier League or a Champions League. And look at the financial incentives of that. Nobody cares about the nominal resale value if you sell him for 5p, whatever, if he delivers something big like that. So it's...
How much do we sell Henry for? No one cares. It's just not the point. And I think you're right about that. I think also another thing you said, which I think is a good thing to stress, is like, I'm expecting, as I said, maybe a 50-60 million pound impact from the player. So I don't want to give numbers now because I need to think about it more, but for probably something like 70-80 million pounds. That's because you're buying potential, right? So 50-60 million pound in the first season. Hopefully that develops. But equally, we've spent all year crying out for someone who can run, someone who's tall, who wins half of their, like, I think he's like 97th percentile for aerials 1 or something. Someone who Odegaard can pick out, someone who Saka can pick out of the back post, someone like all those chances that we have, that we create and go, we need a striker. So he's coming into a system where he could bang. Who knows? We're playing it down because we don't want to go big and say this is the answer. And I don't think he is, in theory. But there is also a world where he completely flops. But there is a world where he bangs. And I think that shouldn't just be taken completely off the table to come into a team that is crying out for something. It's like water in the desert. If you have water at home, you've been drinking water all day, taste it when you're in the desert. Like, it's a completely different thing. We are in the desert with strikers.
Do you know the interesting thing is just quickly to jump in, right? Don't know if you felt this, but I've always felt this in a lot of games this season as well, outside of the fact that I believe Arsenal play the food so much in the final third. That is something that Benjamin Cesco is going to really help in terms of he's just going to receive it and he's going to hit. He's going to have a shot. It will annoy you, but it'll also be like, oh, glad someone's just having a shot. Let's just test the keeper. The amount of times we have not tested the goalkeeper is frustrating, right? Against Southampton, like, again, for me, we had a discussion about the use of Declan Rice and other things, such as the use of Ethan Nwaneri at times and the Mikel, and there's question marks there, in my opinion. But in terms of tactically, the idea is against Southampton, playing a back 5, we're then looking to overload with a front 6, and we've got really good set up tactically there in terms of finding solutions, and the idea was to put a lot of cutbacks, a lot of crosses into the box, and the amount of times players are just so static in the box and waiting for the ball to fall to them, it's so frustrating. Someone like Benjamin Cesco, one of the things he's really, really good at is his movement in box situations. He's incessantly looking to make some form of a run, and I don't see that with a lot of our players in box situations, so that's definitely going to help.
Bro, at the Newcastle game, do you know who the front 3 is? The goals front 3. They're content creators. They do like a lot of anyway, whatever, the front 3. Anyway, I was sat next to Juwan from the front 3. He will attest. Literally, I was just sat there going, "Where's the movement?" Like, when you're there, when you're watching, it's in front of you, and you're not watching it on TV, especially from behind, like on the end, because I was in the clock end. It's so obvious how static we are, and it's such a big thing. Someone who's just going to make some run, especially when teams jump up, because our natural inclination at the minute is when a team jumps up, say we pass back to Partey or Rice, whoever it might be, and the other team's line jumps up. One of our big issues is we have no one who's willing to make that counter movement, that second run. Martinelli seems to, I don't want to say be coached out of him, because it never really was him. Saka wouldn't do that. He's much more ball to feet. Someone who's willing to do that, it's going to have such a big impact. So I think it's a really important point. Josh Miller, Team Edward or Team Jacob? I mean, Šeško or Gyökeres? Hopefully we've covered that. Look, I think with Gyökeres, like, George and I did a scout on him, and we don't think he's the right person for the club. But equally, in terms of here's where he would score goals. Certain transition moments, I think it does our high turnover moments. He would get some goals there. Here's where he would score goals. I think he'd score some goals, like sniffing chances out in the box. Those maybe like cutbacks and things like that. He'd be on the end of those. I think he'd probably score. Well, he'd score some penalties, and that shouldn't be sniffed out. But there's again, I go back to the same thing. The puzzle piece, the exact puzzle, the gap we have is Šeško shaped. So it's not Gyökeres shaped, and that's my point. Let's carry on with James Wright. Double RB Leipzig raid and bring Xavi as well. Much love. Yeah, just quick detour.